Good evening, everybody, and welcome to I Just Need a Minute. My name is Callie Cawthon Friels. I am the pastor of congregational care at the Faith Community. I'm really excited to be here with you all tonight. As you come in, please drop a comment, say hey, let us know you're here. Maybe share this with a friend who you think may benefit from the conversation tonight. So we're continuing with the theme of Easter for this month of April, since Easter was this past Sunday. We celebrated the resurrection. And when Tierney reached out to me to see if I'd be interested in doing I Just Need a Minute tonight, she was like, it'd be cool if you could talk about resurrection and maybe also your book. I was like, okay, I'll see if I can find a way to tie those things together a little bit. So my book that just came out, Reclamation, is about looking at the clobber passages, like the handful of verses that folks have used to demonize queer folk, particularly in the church, to try and humanize us and all of that fun stuff that we really enjoy dealing with. Please note the sarcasm. And recognizing that there's been a lot of fantastic work that goes into, or that has gone into highlighting that those verses have been mistranslated and therefore misused. So that's not what the book is about, but it's a jumping off point from there to say, well, if that's not what those verses about, what do they actually teach us, and how can we reclaim the lessons therein? So I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation tonight about queerness, reclamation, and resurrection all together. And I think an important place to start is honestly with the lived experience of queer people, right? Myself included. So, a very common aspect, if you listen to the stories of queer people, more often than not, you're going to hear some common themes, particularly if they grew up in the church, if that church was non affirming, or if they grew up in homophobic homes. Right. Unfortunately, a lot of those commonalities look like us having to hide ourselves because people noticed that we were different, or that, me being a woman was like, oh, well, you're tomboyish, or like you don't really present the way that a woman typically does, or things of that nature. So a lot of commonality that we have in our stories is like constantly having to allow people to push our identity down, which for me, that's a form of crucifixion, right? That other folks would require, to put it bluntly, the death of my identity, who I am as a human, in order to make room for their comfort, right? To justify their worldview so they can feel comfortable in whatever space that they're in. And we see this happening right now across the country as states like Texas and Florida continue, and others continue to propose legislation that make it illegal to talk about gender and sexuality in the classroom with young kids, even to go so far as, talk about like why Johnny in the class has two dads, right? So we still see these things happening where the powers that be are putting all of these measures in place to say that our identities don't matter, they're not significant, or we need to change our identity in order to be acceptable to society. So daily, we encounter folks who are trying to crucify who we are in order to achieve their own agenda. And that's really discouraging, honestly. It's tiring to see like my lived experience be talked about in the news as if it's some kind of debate point. When really I just want to live my life, love my wife, and get on with doing the work that I love. But the other thing that this constant stifling of who we are and our identities brings about is the constant need of resurrection, right? So every time I'm put in a situation where I am told that my identity isn't appropriate, or I feel like I have to hide in order to fit in, the act of me reclaiming who I am and reclaiming the reality that God made me, as Harrison likes to say with the emerging generations, God made me like this on purpose. God made me who I am, and I am made in the image of God just as I am, as a queer person doing the ministry that I love. When I take those moments to reclaim that identity with myself, that is resurrection. I am breathing life back into something that God made beautiful. And every time a queer person does that, they are engaging in the holy practice of resurrection. And this is a reality that doesn't exist just for queer folks, right? Not just for the folks in the LGBTQ plus community. Like other folks who have been pushed to the margins of society know the importance of this kind of reclamation and resurrection as well. I think particularly of my BIPOC siblings and just all of the lies that they have seen for years portrayed about them in the media, particularly thinking about Black folk and how on crime shows for just generations they were viewed as always like the drug smugglers or the gangsters or what have you. And it hasn't been until recently that those images in the media have started to change. And so you all know what it's like to have to say that's not my identity. I know how God made me, and resurrect that identity daily when everyone around you tells you that that's not who you are, that you're something else, that you're something to be reviled. So, those of us who have experienced being shoved out on the margins, we know what it's like to have to look deep in ourselves and engage in that purposeful act of resurrection, frankly, so we can live fully abundant lives, right? We have to engage in this practice so that we can heal for ourselves, so that we can bring healing to our families, so that we can bring healing to our loved ones. Um, like, we know what that is like, and it's hard work, and oftentimes it's messy work, but it's such fruitful work, right? Like as exhausting as resurrection is over and over and over again, we celebrate it every Easter. And I think it's something that we also need to celebrate within our communities, especially the communities who are pushed to the margins for being no one other than who we are. So that's it for my I Just Need a Minute tonight, thinking about the intersection of queerness and resurrection, how that's a practice that we practice in regularly. Um, and I think honestly allows us to better understand certain aspects of Jesus' ministry as a result. I mean, I can't imagine, what it was like being Jesus and hearing the Pharisees say all these false things about him, and then him ultimately making the ultimate reclamation and resurrection of his identity as God incarnate, right? Um, I kind of feel Jesus on that a little bit. At least in so much as I can understand having to constantly rebut within myself the lies that people would tell me about myself, if that makes sense. Um, but yeah, so that's really it for tonight. Thank you so much for coming out. So in terms of what else is going on at TFC, we've got Bible and Beyond on Saturday. You definitely want to be there for that. We're still going to be continuing down the Easter resurrection theme. So we'll have a really good conversation. That'll be at 4 o'clock on Zoom. So definitely want to make sure that you are on our email list so you can get the link to that private Zoom. All right. Thank you so much. We'll see you on Saturday.